I appreciate all of you joining us today. This is obviously March 21st. This is a day where we had hoped for a somewhat different celebration and conversation with you all, but wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to bring together some of those organizations, and there are many across the state. State groups, local groups, neighborhood groups who have been engaged in this issue not just for months and years, but decades in some cases. And so I wanted to recognize the leadership of these different organizations and give them all just a minute or two to comment on some of the things that they plan to be doing as we go forward from this day on. And so without, again, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIRG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I'll have a few more comments in just a moment, but I wanted to start the show with Representative Tony Klein, the Chair of the House Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, to say a few words. Tony?
I'd actually like Representative Edwards to come up with me as well. Representative Edwards and myself have served together on the same committees for the last 10 years, and I don't think it's been any secret that one of the cornerstones of our legislative agenda has to hopefully work very hard to see the retirement of this plant on March 21st or 22nd of 2012. And the happy thing I can say is that I think that that we have been as successful as we could in terms of having a state speak for itself and determine its own future when it comes to issues like this. So we have done our job. Was there disappointment? Yes, there's disappointment. Was there surprise? No, there was no surprise that the federal courts would rule in our favor. I've never entertained real hope that was going to occur, but I think that the state, and thanks to all the organizations behind us, has said what it wants for its future, and it clearly wants a nuclear-free Vermont. Thanks.
I think Tony said it very well. I would also like to thank all of the grassroots efforts that have been going on around the state to help with this movement and help us to put our feet on a sound energy path. Excuse me. I'm thinking about the past because at 11:29 tonight, there will be no more electrons flowing to Vermont from Vermont Yankee, and that is a good thing. But we have a lot of work before us, and it's very good to know that we have all the support that we do in this state. The people have spoken. We'll see what happens next.
Thank you. Next, I want to invite Chris Williams from Citizens Awareness Network.
Thank you, Paul. As he said, I'm Chris Williams. I'm representing the Citizens Awareness Network and the Vermont Yankee Decommissioning Alliance. Between both of those organizations, we have cumulatively 60 years worth of organizing experience and commitment to closing Vermont Yankee. That won't change. Our resolve to see this plant closed and our commitment to grassroots organizing is our strength, and again, our commitment to the citizens of Vermont. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Sandy Levine from Conservation Law Foundation.
Thanks so much for being here. So I think like others here, I had this on my calendar as a retirement party for Vermont Yankee, but it seems like I'm going to be drinking alone, at least for today. I'm disappointed, but I remain very hopeful. I really do. As a lawyer, I've been seeing some really wild rides concerning Vermont Yankee over the past 10 years when CLF began to be involved. This plant was not a good deal in 2001 when it was sold to Entergy. It's not a good deal when they sought permission to continue to operate in 2008. It's certainly not a good deal when their lawyers went to court to seek to continue to operate the plant past its current license. And more recently, it's not a good deal when they're making claims that Vermont taxpayers should pay their outrageously multi-million-dollar legal fees. Time and again, Vermont Yankees prove that it's not a good deal for Vermont. I'm disappointed, but I'm disappointed we don't have the send-off I had hoped for today, but we will have that send-off. I'm confident of that. Entergy cannot continue to thumb its nose at Vermont. It still needs state approval to operate for another 20 years, and it doesn't seem like that will be forthcoming. So I look forward to a future party with all of you, to having a real send-off. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. And then Ned from the New England Coalition.
Thank you, Paul. Ned Childs from the New England Coalition. The New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution was founded in 1971. We have fought this battle for over 40 years. We are so pleased such a large grouping of organizations, comprised primarily of Vermonters, has chosen to assist us in our hard work to shutter and decommission the Vermont Yankee nuclear generating station. The Coalition believes strongly that we stand on solid legal ground in our legal contention of the issues at hand, and that if the legal and regulatory process is allowed to proceed without excessive meddling by industry and/or corrupt regulators, this reactor will shut down, and soon. The Coalition is a party to the Public Service Board process, a full party at the NRC trial involving the missing state water quality permit, and we filed as friend of the court in the Murtha proceedings. No one can argue that the public has been repeatedly misled, lied to, and extorted by a bullying industry which has bet all of our ranches on the unwise pursuit of nuclear power profits. This is not only a David versus Goliath story. It is really the story of Faust, where a deal was made with the devil on all of our behalves, while an innocent nation, and in fact world, slept. Thank you.
Thanks, Ned. Now, Ed Anthers from Nuclear Free Vermont.
He's right here.
Not here. Okay, Leslie Sullivan Sachs from Safe and Green.
The Safe and Green campaign does grassroots organizing in the 50 towns in Vermont, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire within 20 miles of the reactor. We represent those who, for the past 40 years, have lived in harm's way. Our lives, property, and natural environment are most at risk, and therefore, we have a unique responsibility. Before moving to Brattleboro, I lived in central Vermont for 30 years. Living in the evacuation zone is very different. Every time an alarm goes off, every time fire trucks or a lot of police head south, every time the Vermont Yankee siren sounds, or every time I hear a noise I just can't identify, or when there's an earthquake or a flood, my first thought is, has something happened at Vermont Yankee? People who have lived with this for 40 years tell me that it is the same for them. It doesn't get any easier. In fact, since Fukushima, it's gotten worse. There's a level of daily anxiety that doesn't exist elsewhere in Vermont. So I joined the Safe and Green campaign. Today, our 800 members should have been here celebrating with you tonight. Instead, we will continue to wonder if tritium is leaking into our groundwater, if we can fish in our streams, if our children, like us, have a bag packed, ready to evacuate at a moment's notice. And we will continue to organize and to speak out, starting tomorrow. We will do so as long as the beautiful towns, villages, and farms in the Connecticut River Valley remain under the shadow of the reactor.
Jamie Fidel from Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Thanks, Paul. I'd like to talk about a couple things looking ahead with the Public Service Board proceeding. Vermont Natural Resources Council feels strongly that the PSB has the authority to ensure that Vermont Yankee will not have an undue adverse effect on Vermont's natural environment, and that includes water quality. There are valid environmental concerns that do not relate to preempted issues regarding safety. VNRC, and we are also representing the Connecticut River Watershed Council in the Public Service Board proceedings. We'll continue to participate in the proceedings, encouraging the Public Service Board to consider the decommissioning costs of remediation of groundwater contamination, and to look at the impacts to fish in the Connecticut River from thermal discharges of the plant. Our position is we do not believe a CPG should be issued for the continued operation of the facility because of compliance issues with existing orders, MOUs, Vermont's environmental laws, and trust issues related to VY as a fair and reliable partner to the state of Vermont. So we can pledge today that we will continue to work with the parties that are gathered here today to assure that Vermont's interests are protected. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Is Deborah here from VYDA? No. Okay. So there are other organizations that will also be represented here this afternoon. At 4 o'clock, we'll be folks down by State Street in front of the State House for a little gathering, and then at 5 o'clock in room 10, a kind of a ceremony, a retirement ceremony of sorts. We'd like to be giving the gold watch to the folks at Energy Louisiana, but they don't get it yet. I would say, tomorrow morning, folks are going to wake up across Vermont, turn on a light switch, and recognize we don't need Vermont Yankee anymore. Their light will come on, and we will not be getting, no utility in this state will be getting any power from Vermont Yankee. The people of this state and their representatives here in the legislature and in the Shumlin administration have recognized that it's time to turn the page. I think that the people of Vermont have had enough of Entergy Louisiana's leaks, lies, and lawyers. It is time instead for a clean energy future for Vermont. That's what our state's 20-year energy plan now in place would have us move toward. That means more conservation, more efficiency, more development of renewable power, clean renewable power that creates jobs and does not create the kind of risk and threat that Entergy Louisiana and Vermont Yankee have brought to this state. After 40 years, I suppose we can give thanks that the worst problems that we've experienced have been radioactive tritium and other materials getting into Vermont's water, or a collapsed cooling tower, or a fire in the transformer, or dozens of cracks in the steam dryer. I could go on and on. The judge suggested that the legislators didn't have reliability in mind. With a track record like that, I can't believe that he could suggest that reliability was not an issue, top of mind issue for every legislator who voted in these matters here. But that's an issue that is appealed. We appreciate the Attorney General's leadership in moving forward with that appeal. A number of our organizations will be a part of that process to the degree that the courts allow us to. A number of us are interveners in the Public Service Board process, and we will continue to try to move forward with that in the most aggressive way possible. In fact, I think that there are issues that remain there, despite what Judge Murtha has suggested to date, that could allow the Public Service Board to take significant steps that could even see this plant retired. The legislature will have more to say on this issue. And I don't just mean shutting down this plant or retiring it, but as long as this plant is operating, I'm confident that the organizations here, with legislative leadership from the reps that you've heard today and their colleagues and senators, and indeed this administration, that we will continue to be vigilant to ensure that whatever risks this plant continues to present to the people of this state and to our environment will be mitigated or minimized to the greatest degree possible. But this plant is still being run by people who do not have the trust and faith of the people of this state because they haven't earned it. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. And so we will need to continue to participate in every forum available to us, not just to retire this plant, but to ensure that to the degree it is operating, and operating in a way where none of that power is coming to the people of this state, that we will minimize the threat that it poses to the people of Vermont. With that, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
I wanted to check on the contention that no power will come to Vermont. I mean, it's going to go to ISO to New England, from which our utilities buy wholesale, right?
No utility will be in a contract to purchase power from Vermont Yankee. I'm not talking about whether the electrons, some of them will be, utilized in Vermont. That's kind of more of a physics question than a contractual matter. But if this plant were to shut down, it wouldn't have any effect on Vermonters' capacity to turn on their light switch tomorrow. So that's the reality. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't move forward with a clean energy future, and in fact, the House deserves credit. Yesterday, giving passage and second reading to an important clean energy bill that will actually build new power, new green energy resources in this state, and we thank the House members for doing that, and it's pretty exciting. The final passage will come today on Vermont Energy Independence Day. So this state is already moving forward, has indeed, I think, already turned the page beyond Vermont Yankee. It's just that we have a federal judge that believes that we should continue to accept their waste. That seems like a pretty bad deal for Vermonters.
Paul, this is in the federal court system, so despite your opposition, really what influence do you have on that legal case? And you may be marking the event of your disappointment, but isn't the reality is that in terms of that case, you really don't have much say about it?
Well, we'll see. Some of us filed friend of the court briefs in the federal district court. Again, to the degree that we are granted authority or the possibility of doing that, we'll continue to participate in that process. We'll continue to have conversations with the Attorney General and the administration. But primary responsibility for winning that case is not on the shoulders of the people here. I'm not taking significant issue with your premise here. We will give whatever ideas and assistance we can to the Attorney General and any others who are kind of working on that case. But that's in their hands to try to win that case in the Second Circuit. I don't know if Sandy or anybody else wants to comment on it.
Yeah. Don't forget that the Murtha ruling reaffirmed the authority of the Public Service Board to determine a certificate of public good. And even though Entergy asked for that requirement to be lifted, they were unsuccessful. So at the end of the day, we still believe the Public Service Board may have a role to play, as well as that common sense will somehow come to bear on the judges at the appellate court, and even later, even possibly at the level of the Supreme Court.
So is the Public Service Board your best hope to try to close this plant down in a timely fashion?
I long ago gave up trying to predict a best hope or a worst hope or any particular outcome. The federal district court's order left intact the broad authority of the Vermont Public Service Board, and frankly, that's a forum where many folks here have been participating for years, and sometimes very successfully. There's no doubt that this plant needs authority from the Vermont Public Service Board to continue to operate, and whether they get that permission, that remains, that's unclear. The board said, it gave a very strong decision just a couple of days ago, noting that if Entergy operates after today, it's in violation of its existing licenses.
But didn't it say you're in violation, but go ahead and do it anyway?
It said you will be in violation of your current licenses, of your current approvals. And a nod to the district court said we're not shutting you down.
I'd like to also comment. In terms of your question regarding what's our best hope, it may be somewhat of a stretch, but I always hold out those kind of hopeful thoughts. I think our best hope might very well lie with the board of directors of Entergy Corporation. And the reason I say that is that most of the reactors that have been retired in this country, they've been retired by the directors of the corporations that own them, and they've been retired for the most part for economic reasons. And if you just take a minute and think about what we're facing, or what Entergy is facing in Vernon, they have a condenser right now that's crying out to be turned off. The estimate, and it's been bouncing around a little, is $150 million. Just recently, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission declared in the face of what they've begun to learn about what's happened at Fukushima, they're going to require nuclear operators, especially those operators of GE Mark I reactors, to upgrade systems that deal, for the most part, with loss of power incidents. The estimates that I've read are for $100 million. So between the condenser and those upgrades, we're looking at $250 million. And now I'll take license to add to that what I call the nuclear cost overrun multiplier. And I'll add $150 million to it. That's my estimate. That's $500 million that Entergy and its board of directors have to think long and hard about in their quest to keep this ancient machine running.
Any other questions?
Do you have any thoughts about it, or have any regrets about the way the state proceeded through Act 74, Act 160, particularly the legislature, and the degree to which, you know, the safety, the S word was mentioned, and should the state have handled all that differently?
No, I mean, I think talk about Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm not going to get into that, but and to suggest that no legislator in this building should utter the word safety after the constituents, time after time are expressing this legitimate concern. I think that's ridiculous, really, and it's hard to fathom how a federal judge would take that to mean that he then knew what was in the hearts and minds of every legislator when they voted on that issue. I mean, that's an incredible stretch. He went so far as to suggest that just because a witness in front of a committee mentioned the word safety, that too was evidence that safety was the only thing on the minds of legislators when they voted. I think he did a tremendous disservice, not just in the precedent that he set, but the disrespect that he demonstrated to the legislators here in Vermont in issuing that ruling, and the chilling effect that he may have had on the participation that the citizens will have, not just on this issue, but any number of issues in the future. So I'm not going to criticize legislators. I think they did a tremendous job in representing the interests of their constituents, and I think the vote in the Senate, the specific vote in the Senate, which is not one that Mirtha was talking explicitly about, but 26-4, that had majorities of Democrats and Republicans voting against the continued operation of this plant, and for good reason. And for a federal judge to come in and try to overrule that based on some pretty, well, I'll stop there. No, I'm not going to criticize.
If I could just add one thing to that. Vermont Natural Resources Council, in the brief, the friend of the court brief that we submitted to Judge Mirtha, went through a fairly lengthy exercise of outlining the legislature's authority under its desire to promote renewable energy and the long track record that has existed in this building as support for legislation. And we were very disappointed to see that Judge Mirtha did not examine that part of the record and somehow weigh that in contrast to statements that were made about safety. And we feel that that is an issue that at the appellate level of review must be considered, and especially what was recognized on the face of the statute as valid exercises of authority.
Let me just go back to the question about our best hope. My best hope would be that industry would see the light, that they would tire of their lies and their suppression of the details. Do you want to reference this book, We Almost Lost Detroit, which goes into the Fermi breeder reactor in the 60s, deals extensively with the many meltdowns, core damages that occurred in the early reactors, and the passage of Price-Anderson indemnity law, and the reauthorization of the Price-Anderson, at which time the update of the Brookhaven National Laboratory report, the WASH 740 report, was suppressed and basically locked away in a vault. I would like to think that industry would get the message. Basically, General Electric, through its allowance of the light water, boiling water reactor Mark I, like we have Fukushima on the Connecticut down in Vernon, has effectively destroyed the country of Japan, much more handily than the Japanese ever hoped to do in their attack on Pearl Harbor. I would like to think that General Electric would move to withdraw its support from its uranium mining and milling and energy fabrication. They sold the controlling interest of their nuclear department to the Japanese. They've recovered their costs. I would like to think that the people in Massachusetts, represented by Deval Patrick, might step up to the plate and buy that reactor from Entergy and shut it down, thereby preserving their main source of drinking water, the Quabbin Reservoir. The open waters of the Quabbin Reservoir are 17 miles from the spent fuel pool at Vermont Yankee. Spent fuel pools can and do catch on fire. If you look hard enough on EX SKF Informable, you'll find a picture taken from a US military helicopter of the spent fuel pool fire in Reactor 4, with its black plume of radioactive debris, aerosolized uranium plutonium, spreading out over the island of Japan, and later those hot particles would land in Washington, California, St. Louis, and even Vermont. In a situation where wealth controls the show, the wealthy person at the end of the day, the guy with all the money, should step forward, buy the reactor and shut it down, tender for the outstanding shares and the debt, and walk away from a mistake. At what point does somebody step up and say, yes, I have enough money, we made a mistake, we're going to atone for it? That's what my best hope would be.
I would like to address the question about legislative intent. Legislative intent is always embedded in what the legislation says. That's the legislative intent. And every legislator in this building, whether or not you're pro-Yankee or opposed to Yankee, or every legislator across the entire United States, should have been horrified, insulted, and incredibly worried about what that does to a legislator's ability to speak their mind in free debate, to come up with legislation going forward. And that's the big problem with this federal judge's decision.
Anything else? Thanks everybody for being here. Appreciate it.